Thanks so much for coming. It's a really exciting day. I'm AJ, Chief Strategy Officer at Offchain Labs, the team that's been developing the Arbitrum technology stack and servicing the Arbitrum ecosystem. Been working here for about 2.5 years, a little more, almost 3 years actually, on the Arbitrum ecosystem and growing out the community, the ecosystem, the teams that are building and trying to do all we can to be supportive of the teams building with the Arbitrum ecosystem. A lot of this is going to be a talk about things that we've done in the past, some trips down memory lane, and also sort of, excitement for the future, and it gives you a sense of where we are within the Arbitrum landscape. Before we get fully into it, for those who may be a little bit less familiar about the Arbitrum technology stack, the value proposition, let's just discuss quickly the core reason. Why would you build on Arbitrum? Why are you using Arbitrum technology? If you were here in the morning, this was a deep dive basically of session after session. So I'm going to be extremely high level. The reason why you build on Arbitrum is because it's the leading and most advanced technical solution, layer 2 solution that settles onto Ethereum. So what does that mean? We all know that Ethereum by design does not scale. The reason for that is, we have something called the blockchain trilemma, where there's security, decentralization, and throughput, and you can't really have all three within a specific ecosystem environment. And Ethereum prioritizes security and decentralization. So how does Ethereum get throughput? Using rollup technology. And a rollup is essentially a set of smart contracts that looks and feels like a blockchain, and in some ways, acts like a blockchain. And it takes all of those transactions, it batches them together, compresses them, posts the data to Ethereum, and recreates the state so that whatever happened on Arbitrum is settled on Ethereum, and you can have the confidence of not just trusting Arbitrum, but being reliant on Ethereum to maintain your data. Using Arbitrum is extremely simple. It's EVM compatible from the bytecode level. Just change your RPC, deploy your contracts, change your transit. If you're a user, change in MetaMask, your wallet, bridge funds, and it really is the exact same feel of using Ethereum. And that's the core value proposition. You can help Ethereum solve the blockchain trilemma by having scale. How is a blockchain and an Arbitrum and a layer 2 different than a typical sidechain? There are really 4 factors. Data availability, instead of being set out to a separate validator set, it's settled on Ethereum. L1 and L2 bridging. The bridge is not like is not like a multi-sig bridge where you hold your assets and you escrow. It's a bridge between L1 and L2 that can be, relied on from the L1 side to maintain the security of what you're doing. Arbitrum maintains a security mechanism called a fraud proof, so that anybody can challenge the state transition of what occurred on L2 directly on L1. And that provides the security of Ethereum, and it's much more resistant to typical attacks that you might see in a typical sidechain of like two-third honesty consensus mechanisms, where the principle, if you have permissionless validation, is you only need to trust one person. That one person could be yourself. So that's really the core value property of why you would be building on Arbitrum, why you should be building on L2 rollup technologies on top of Ethereum. So let's talk about Arbitrum 1, the flagship product that is controlled by the Arbitrum DAO, and where we see all the growth within the layer 2 environments and the Arbitrum ecosystem in particular. There's about $6 billion in total value bridged from Ethereum. We have about 60% of the rollup market share within the Arbitrum community. There's more than 10 million wallets and over 1,000 applications that have launched the Arbitrum stack. It's an extremely mature and robust environment, and it's amazing what the ecosystem from a liquidity perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, can offer to the developers and users alike. Looking here, I remember if you go back to 2021, we're thinking about how do we launch this ecosystem? What partnerships do we need? Who needs to be included? And everyone was really focused on the L1 applications. Which chain is Uniswap going to go to? Where is Synthetics going to go? Where is Curve going to go? How are we going to deal with all of this fragmentation? The reality is that a lot of the major applications on L1 went multi-chain because they wanted to be in very different environments. And the infrastructure that they used all moved to L2, Etherscan, the Graph, Alchemy, and Fura. I don't mean to leave anyone out, but really the developer experience from an infrastructure perspective has replicated itself on L2. But the thing that I'm most proud about is the group in the middle. And, those are just representative, is the Arbitrum native projects. Arbitrum enabled a whole new class of builders, particularly around derivatives, options, perps, that could not have existed on layer 1. It's just simply too expensive. And they've proliferated, and they've been extremely successful. I would say, GMX is probably the most notable example within the Arbitrum ecosystem. Being Arbitrum native, growing into a behemoth in its vertical, And it's really a function of the technology stack that it's built on. Obviously, they deserve the credit from a business development perspective and a growth, but that could never have survived on layer one. It would have been extremely expensive and not viable. And I think, unlocking use cases like that is key. Treasure DAO is a community building with games that require high throughput. Those are the types of things that layer two technologies unlocked. And it's been an amazing, from a personal perspective, it's been an amazing experience working with teams like that have been, very L2 native, focused on, scaling. I want to look at this chart because I think that it highlights a lot of really important components of what's happening within the Arbitrum ecosystem. We were frequently told from teams that, the Arbitrum ecosystem, it's not sustainable, it's airdrop farming, and like the data could not show anything other than that being, empirically false. If you take a look in the beginning, for the people who are Arbitrum OGs, there's a huge spike, then a fall off. That was what we call the RB9 weekend, where there was like a meme coin that launched and people were farming it, somehow like $1 billion of liquidity moved into the system. Most of it moved out. But if you sort of look beyond that first little spike, the thing that you can notice is that it is an extremely smooth curve. And we're talking about numbers that are staggering. There's about 1.15 million ETH that exists in the Arbitrum bridge today. The last of those 4 diamonds, which, to the right, the most recent one, that's when the token launch happened. And as you can see, the growth has continued. It hasn't tapered off at all. Never mind, the growth rate might have slowed a little bit, but there has absolutely been no, drop within the ecosystem. And I think that, is a tribute to the developers and the builders who have confidence and who are attracting liquidity from liquidity providers and users. This is another chart that shows something similar. Obviously, the scaling environment is extremely competitive, but Arbitrum 1 is more than holding its weight. We have on the left Arbitrum 1 with, this chart's about a few weeks dated, over 1.1 million ETH, and on the right is a staggered collection of all scaling solution competitors, and their combined total of Ethereum is about 35% less. It's a real tribute to the builders within the Arbitrum ecosystem that this amount of liquidity has stuck. I think a lot of it started because of the maturity of the technology stack, first mover advantage, but it's clearly continued because of the developers and the builders. All of you who've attended today are really deserve the credit. If you look in DeFi TVL, it's a very similar narrative. So this is a chart that's actually priced in ETH and not priced in US dollars because there's much too much volatility around that. But as you can see, within DeFi protocols, there's clearly an upward and to the right trend of more liquidity being posted into protocols. If you're looking at the L1, L2, so we're talking about the Arbitrum and Ethereum rollup-centric roadmap. This is a chart that shows Uniswap volumes, and Ethereum is in blue and Arbitrum is in orange. As you can see, over time, Arbitrum is making up has significantly grown its percentage of Uniswap volume compared to L1 and proportionally, and obviously it's been dwarfing other scaling solutions that have the Uniswap protocol has launched there. Arbitrum 1 is where the Ethereum rollup-centric roadmap is occurring. This chart I think is interesting as well. We've passed 10 million unique wallets. If you look at the date that I've highlighted, March 16th, that was the date that the airdrop was announced. And you would have expected the number of wallets to unique addresses to have decreased, or the slope to have decreased at least over time. But if you look at the chart, the slope has significantly increased after it. And I think it's a function, and it's proof that this is really a sustainable ecosystem of what's being built by developers and demand for users of Arbitrum 1 block space. This is an interesting chart which shows the comparison between Arbitrum and Ethereum. So obviously the goal is to scale Ethereum, provide a lot more throughput. The Arbitrum protocol is designed to have, from a gas perspective, multiples of Ethereum before any congestion hits. If you look at the trends, Arbitrum obviously had a huge spike in transactions. That was around, the airdrop claim, but has settled in to be approximately maybe a little bit slightly under the daily number of transactions of Ethereum. And that's the chart to the left. But if you look at the chart to the right, the gas used on Arbitrum is actually significantly higher than Ethereum. And, just so you could get some context on that chart, the red flat line is Ethereum. The reason it's flat is because basically every block of Ethereum is almost always filled every single day. So you don't really see any volatility. But within the Arbitrum world, you do see a lot of volatility, but the gas is clearly much higher. And the reason for that is the typical transaction is much more computationally intensive on Arbitrum because it's unlocked use cases that don't exist on Ethereum. So we've been talking a lot about DeFi protocols, who's been building on Arbitrum, but the Arbitrum ecosystem, the Arbitrum tech stack has gathered the attention of non-traditional non-crypto native builders as well. One really interesting case study is the Norwegian government is working on two different things on the Arbitrum tech stack. The first is the building of a private registry. So apparently private company ownership is public information in Norway, and they want to make that data much more accessible as part of a broader vision of how they can make increased liquidity around those sort of equity options. And the second is the Norwegian government's been pretty public about building and testing what a CBDC could look like, but they want to see how it can interact with public networks outside of a private network of distribution, and they're currently using the Arbitrum testnet to test those things. The Arbitrum ecosystem, I think, has shined with its passionate crypto native builders, but as we continue to scale, I think it's critical that additional parties can obviously take advantage of the technology stack. So we've been talking about Arbitrum Nova. Arbitrum Nova is a really great focus on Arbitrum One. Is a really great focus on the value propositions of DeFi, all of the success stories of DeFi. Arbitrum Nova is really focused on social and gaming, and the trade-offs between Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova are whether the call data is posted to Ethereum or to a certificate. And Arbitrum Nova unlocks a lot of cost savings by posting to a data availability committee that posts a certificate to Ethereum instead of to Ethereum directly. It's about 10 times cheaper. So an Arbitrum transaction on Arbitrum One might be about 10 cents per transaction. Nova, which uses the antitrust technology, is typically sub-penny. And who should be using Arbitrum Nova? It's really meant for high throughput dApps that are, consumer scaling focused and also gaming. When you're talking about an Arbitrum One typical DeFi application, we can use GMX, for example. The delta between a 10-cent transaction and a 1-cent transaction is not typically the driver of the costs associated with opening or closing a position. There's fees, etc., that are playing a much larger component. So liquidity and security are core properties of a typical DeFi project. But there are applications that are mainly in the gaming sphere that really can't justify that delta between 10 and 1 cent, especially if they're abstracting it from users. And they really found a home on Nova. One of the games, I think they presented earlier today has told us that there's about 7x cost savings using Nova versus, one of the competing sidechains that they were existing on before. So Arbitrum Nova is a great use case for gaming. The Data Availability Committee, the principles are that you have a committee of members who hold the data and they post certificates to Ethereum. When we built the original Arbitrum One committee, before we turned it over to the DAO, the principle was we wanted a collection of Web 2 and Web 3 crypto native organizations so that everybody should feel comfortable trusting that somebody will maintain that data. Any of the validators, if the committee acts malicious, can force the rollup into the protocol into a rollup. So you do have a security mechanism backstop, and these are the current members of the committee. Obviously, this is now DAO controlled, and the DAO can add, remove, or change any members that it wishes. Just focusing on gaming a little bit, we've seen some really strong successes. I think the Beacon is a really exciting example within the Treasure DAO ecosystem. They had 40,000 mints of their alpha of the game, and they earned about $2.6 million in assets. It was a really exciting game, and I think an early example of the shift that we've seen within crypto gaming from maybe a much more financial component to free mint style, just play the game, you have a free option that a typical gamer might expect. And I think it's really been a strong trend within the Arbitrum ecosystem that they kicked off. This was about 8 months ago. If you look here, we've seen a ton of new games being committed to the Arbitrum ecosystem. Pirate Nation, actually is live now. They spoke earlier today. Forgotten Runes is launching the Goblin Town Zverse. ZTX announced last week that they're building a metaverse within the Arbitrum ecosystem. It's one of the largest, Korean Web 2 communities, Zepeto, their parent organization in the world. So we're really excited about the state of growth in Arbitrum gaming. It's probably taken longer to take off within the Arbitrum ecosystem compared to DeFi, but it really is a top home now for solutions that are looking for places for gaming. Reddit was the early driver of launching Arbitrum Nova when we did. The Arbitrum or Offchain Labs won the scaling bake-off. The Arbitrum technology stack won the scaling bake-off in 2021 when Reddit decided that they wanted to choose a home for the Community Points project. It's been really interesting to see sort of all the advancements there. So for some who are less familiar, Reddit wanted to launch and start with 2 sub-communities on-chain to test and experiment. What does it mean to actually, sort of give more control to token holders within subreddits? They started with the Fortnite and cryptocurrency subreddits. The cryptocurrency subreddit Moons, they actually have really done a lot of creative things around selling advertising space by burning the token. It's an extremely early project, but I think it's a really exciting example of what could be possible on technologies like Arbitrum Nova. Use cases that really aren't the top of mind every day, especially in the DeFi world. For some context, when Reddit launched on Nova, they had to seed 260,000 wallets with tokens. It cost them less than $1,500 to complete that entire operation. On Arbitrum 1, it probably would have been, low tens of thousands. And, on Ethereum, it, would have been an absolute fortune. So what's the future? What are we excited about? Others, Rachel, obviously, who's in the audience, is the tech lead on Stylus. And I'm not going to do anywhere near the justice compared to Rachel of describing what, Stylus can or can't do. If you missed this morning, you should watch it on YouTube. But we've spoken about scaling throughput. We've spoken about scaling costs, but now we're really going to focus on scaling the developer experience. The EVM, the Ethereum, equivalence is the floor. It is not the ceiling. Introducing additional programming languages into the Arbitrum ecosystem using Rust, C, and C++ to start is going to unlock massive growth for the Arbitrum from a technology stack. Of course, the DAO has to decide whether to approve this on the public chains, but it will remain available at the technology level. This will allow programmers who are not crypto native, who are not Web3 native, to see how their typical applications could work on a blockchain, or applications that are building in the Solana ecosystem, for example, or other ecosystems that are not necessarily as closely tied to Ethereum, to not have to make trade-offs between community, liquidity, and the technology that they're building under. And we think that from a technology perspective, this will really unlock a lot. And from a cost perspective, it's significantly cheaper. Rachel will give you the benchmarks afterwards if you want. It's significantly cheaper to do a lot of things than an EVM instruction. So this is a huge technological innovation that we've been working on at Offchain Labs. One thing that's really sort of, beyond just the public chains is the introduction of Arbitrum Orbit. That was announced together with the governance and the establishment of the foundation governing the protocols. There's a lot of demand these days for application-specific chains. Personal opinion, I think in some instances it's still a little bit early. I think that focusing, continuing to grow the developer experience, getting more developers and users to be using the applications should probably still remain the top priority. But for a lot of different reasons, people want their own space. They want their own environments. For example, if composability is less important. So we want to just quickly go through some of the pluses and advantages of using the Arbitrum Orbit stack with proposing at the end some of the potential downsides as well, and then we can open it up for questions. So one of the things that the Orbit chains can do really well is you can get exposure to components of the technology stack that the DAO has not adopted. Stylus is an obvious example. It will be available to the Orbit stack before the DAO because the DAO process of governance and voting will probably just take longer. And you can have much more control over the technology stack in that way. Fast reliability, you don't have to have any concerns around congestion based on other applications. If there's price volatility or liquidations, etc., you're not exposed to that if you're running your own application chain. Account abstraction, there's different ways that you can have more models that are feasible to extract gas from the users and pay for it yourself. And it just gives you a lot more flexibility than you can have on a public chain. From a customizable protocol logic perspective, you can implement things into the base layer that you want. For example, if you want to build governance directly into the chain, you can do a lot of different things in different ways that you can't do on a public network. Decentralization options. You can introduce data availability committees. You can have your own data availability committee, a different data availability committee than the one that exists on Nova. And that's just something that for some teams might be important. We've been speaking to a lot of teams that have been talking to data availability committees as a business development opportunity. You can align with different, ecosystem partners and infrastructure partners by sharing economics, by including them in the committee in a way that you wouldn't have the same influence in a public environment. And it's really easy. The Offchain Labs team has built a one-click deployment where you basically put in your parameters, you press click, and on the test net, a rollup will get spun up. There's a bunch of rollups as service providers that are, getting Arbitrum Orbit into their options for building these chains, and it's going to be really cool. And you can settle them all to the Arbitrum chains as well. From a security perspective, you can choose exactly how you want to configure it. If it's an AnyTrust rollup mode, we've also been seeing, teams interested in adding things like Celestia or alternative data availability committee constructs as well. One growing use case that we're seeing now, a lot more demand, is around permissioned access. As much as I love permissionless systems, there's a lot of fintech organizations that have compliance and regulatory obligations that they need to meet, and an Orbit chain allows them the opportunity to figure out how to deploy a chain around privacy, security, and compliance in a way that can work for their organization's needs. And that's obviously much more complicated to do at the application layer on a public chain. There are a couple of downsides. Cross-chain friction. You're going to be fragmenting liquidity. You're going to have folks have to rely on bridging more, and then infrastructure. And I think this is actually a complexity that's underrated, right? It's easy to spin up a chain, have infrastructure that can support, a very small subset of users. If you're going to grow that chain into a, financial economic hub or extremely high throughput game, you're going to need extremely robust infrastructure and infrastructure partners. And those are things are quite costly. On the public chains, it's covered by the Arbitrum Foundation, but obviously in a private environment, it will be a responsibility of the deployer of the app chain. So those are just some considerations as you think through Orbit. And I just want to say thank you. Building within the Arbitrum ecosystem is truly an honor every day. I love what I do. Couldn't imagine doing anything else right now. So thank you everyone who's been building and making this an amazing journey within the Arbitrum community. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer here or after, whatever.